Welcome, everyone, to our November coffee chat. I'm Laura Knutson-Murray. I'm the GIS coordinator for IrisBG. And with us today is Shanna Jones, who's the social media and community outreach assistant for IrisBG. And also on our call is Oyvind Rusten, who is the CEO and founder of IrisBG. The recording, presentation, and other material will be made available in our knowledge library. All of our previous coffee chats can be found there under the category Articles and Presentations. You can follow the topic IrisBG Coffee Chats and be notified by email every time something new is published. The idea of these sessions is that we would like to offer you a space to connect with your peers and have a chance to chat about any issues that may arise with your work, with your collections. We don't have a fixed format for these sessions, so please get in touch with me if you would like to present on a topic, have a challenge for the community, or have questions for us. It can be anything big or small. Hopefully you will make some new connections today, and together we might become a bit wiser. Save the date for our December coffee chat. We will hear from Sherry Buckhout from the San Diego Zoo and Wildlife Alliance. She is talking about conserving oaks, orchids, and fan palms. It will be a really great conversation. She's a IrisBG super user, so it'll be great to hear from her. And that is December 9th. Here's an overview of all the institutions that registered for the call today. We have some from all over. Australia will probably join us from the recording, but it's nice to see that they are curious and interested as well. So onto our agenda. Our speaker today is Autumn Ayers. She's the manager of Horticulture and Collections at Descanso Garden. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Horticulture in 2018 and also earned a public horticulture degree from the University of Pennsylvania and served in plant records at Longwood Gardens before joining Descanso in 2021. She will be talking about streamlining nursery inventory with the IrisBG-ArcGIS mobile. Without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Autumn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Well, as Laura mentioned, I'll be talking about our nursery inventory process, how we're using ArcGIS Mobile to really try to streamline and get our nursery accessions into our database system. And it's been a process. So as I was joking, I kind of feel like, that meme from It's Always Sunny with the red strings like being drawn and connected. I feel like that when I talk about this. So thanks for sticking with me, and I'll try to answer any questions at the end. A bit of background about Descanso Gardens. So some key facts: we were originally the private estate of Elias Manchester Bodie from 1937 to 1953. He didn't purchase this property with the intention of having a public garden, unlike a lot of other gardens that were sort of estates that were stewarded into being part of the public garden scene. He bought the property and intended to use it for commercial production for cut flowers, to send flowers for corsages, especially camellias, back on the refrigerated rail cars that were just sort of coming on the scene. This property was sold to LA County in 1953, and since then we've had a public-private partnership with them. Descanso Gardens Foundation is a nonprofit contracted to sort of steward the collections in the organization, and the land itself belongs to the county still. We are an remnant oak woodland ecosystem, which is rare in Los Angeles, so we have actually a lot of trees, not what you associate with the area, and a rich horticultural history, mostly of breeding and importation, especially around camellias, lilacs, and roses. Our core collections today include our canopy oak collection, our camellias, roses, cycads, California native plants, lilacs, and what we call our display plants collection, which is sort of rotating. So some background on the nursery problem. So in 2022, we opened a new 22,000 square foot nursery facility known as the Ruth Bourne Nursery and Propagation Center. This was really a revolution to us. We'd previously had sort of a hobby greenhouse that was not up to snuff. The vents were at the bottom, which isn't great for heat like Southern California has. And this really was meant to be a place that we could propagate a lot of the plants that are in our collection that aren't found in the nursery trade through our own sort of backups, so to speak. But Prior to this nursery being built, our nursery plants were not part of our accessioning system. And so the nursery plants were somewhat disconnected from the needs of the garden. Like most places, we had a plant breeder with a bit of a mad scientist streak who often had a lot of plants up there that were sort of pet projects and not really necessarily targeting the propagation needs of the organization towards the collections. All of our labels were handwritten, which can lead to a lot of mistakes, especially during repots, as a lot of them are done by volunteers. So if, say, the first label was hard to read, then you get an entire flat repots with a label that doesn't make any sense, which can really be exponentially a problem over time. And we used to joke that our horticulturists would go shopping in the nursery, which would lead to plants ending up outside of the section that they were purchased for. So sometimes plants were purchased for, say, the rose garden, but the display horticulturist thought they looked nice and took them. And additionally, this new nursery is on the opposite end of our garden as our horticultural offices, which kind of prevented that efficient exchange of information between plant records, other horticulturists, and the nursery. So, during the 21st century, no more handwritten labels. With the arrival of IrisBG and ArcGIS Sync, so the mobile sync, the question became, how can we leverage this thing to create a better nursery management system? I'd already sort of started working on this maybe 3 years ago, trying to build my own system in Survey 123, and I was running into a lot of the same problems that the mobile sync was working on, so I kind of let them iron out a lot of problems for me. Some of our desired outcomes from this new system was, of course, all plants labeled with correct scientific and common name, ideally made by a printer and not handwritten. So scientific and common because obviously scientific is for the needs of our organization. But as I mentioned, a lot of our plant propagation is also handled by volunteers. And so making sure that they know what they're working with is important to us as well. We needed an easy way to distinguish which plants belong to which horticulturist. So when plants come in, they're designated for whichever section they're going to. Generally, it might make sense to have this sorted by a bench, but because some of the benches have microclimates around them, it makes more sense for us to find another way to do it. I'd love to have a live inventory of the nursery so we actually know what is up there and know where plants are going. And just in general, better communication between the nursery, the gardens, and plant records. Our biggest barriers to good data collection and launching the system were sort of 3 problems. So number 1, that our existing nursery inventory was missing important details for accessioning, which resulted in an enormous amount of work for our plant records department upfront. So I say plant records department, as of a couple of months ago, I was able to hire a plant records coordinator. So there are 2 of us working in plant records now, which has been huge to getting this sync running the way that I want it to. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. But our previous nursery inventory was sort of Word document that sometimes had scientific names or whatever name was on the seed label, which wasn't always useful or helpful. And the second problem was really using the ArcGIS mobile sync. There's an inability to delete or change fields or code lists because it breaks the sync. And so that would mean that anyone using the sync would have to be well trained on IrisBG fields. And usually our nursery staff and volunteers weren't. So if we wanted them to be able to using the system, it had to come up with a solution. And also our third problem, that the new inventory would need to be coupled with a printed label system so that we could really ensure proper data collection going forward and that proper communication between all departments. So the first problem, not enough data for accessioning or too much time spent on accessioning. And my sort of solution to this was to make better data import templates for our horticulture staff to use. So this streamlines our accessioning process, makes it clear what information is really necessary to input, and allows non-IrisBG trained people to enter data. So previously, all accessioning had to be done by me, which is really time-consuming, but especially when we're working on the back accessioning process, as I had to go track down people who might have information about when or where plants were purchased from. So this is a screenshot of my bare minimum accessioning template. I'll sort of walk through all of the fields that I have in it. So action, obviously, if you've used data import before, you know that IrisBG needs to know if you're updating or adding an item. Accession year, for us, some of our nursery items are back accessioned. So if it's, say, an index seminim order, that I have a list of those orders and when they were received so I can backdate things. Taxon name. So staff who are trained in IrisBG, myself or Lily, my coordinator, are able to do nomenclature checks, and we actually copy and paste directly from the taxon record in IrisBG, which eliminates any spelling errors and any sort of duplication of taxon data. But I also have this received as field in here. So this is where other staff can put whatever name they receive on the plant label itself. And then if they're writing in the spreadsheet, they can highlight that field so that plant records staff knows to look at it, find its actual taxon name, whether it's an IrisBG or we have to add it, and put that into the taxon name field. But it allows people to enter all of the rest of the data associated with that plant, which saves us a lot of time. And then the status text, location, item type, contact code, donor type, provenance, prop history, received person, and material codes, I have all locked with data validation. So in this template, I also have a references tab, and you can see that I've got code lists directly exported from IrisBG in here. This does mean that if I add contacts or say we have staff changeover, I do have to change those out for the template, but that's still easier than trying to do everything myself. And you can see in this drop down up here that when you click on a field that's locked with data validation, there's only certain codes that you can input. And since those codes are maybe not the clearest for everyone, I've also sort of created a key in the data validation Dropbox that tells you what they mean. So you can see here for prop history, those are not the most intuitive codes for some people. And so there's a little key to it. And then I found that both spec count and item spec count ended up being important for us. Spec count populates on the accession page, where item spec count populates in the item itself. And when I qualify later, it's important for me to have that original record, that A record, to have the original item number, and then after that, the individual item numbers. So I ended up putting both of those in there. Receive date and item status date. So for new plants, these obviously tend to be the same, but for back accessioning, it's valuable to have both dates. If, say, for instance, something was brought in as seed and received in 2024, but here we are in 2025 actually accessioning it, that can be important. We use the purpose field to designate intended planting site or project. So we always put the section first and then whatever area it's supposed to go in. So that way, if plants do disappear from the nursery inventory, we have an idea of where to look for them, but it also will come into play in our labeling system, which I'll talk about later. And then I have two custom attributes on here. Both are accession attributes for size and cost. So we always keep track of the size of a plant when received and also costs. So this coupled with the purpose field allows us to look at costs associated with specific projects. Okay, so the plant records follow up to this. So after we do all the nomenclature checks and we import that data into IrisBG, we can move on to our qualification. When plants do go out into the field, I have a separate template, which I actually export the basics of it from IrisBG. I wrote a report called Item Qualification that has the fields you see to the left here. And then all you have to do is add the action column to that and go through and put the actual qualifiers in over here under item number. And also you can assign where in the garden these have been planted, what day, who gave the information, that kind of thing. So that's a lot easier than, in my experience, than doing them in IrisBG and making individual item lines for each one. Okay, so our second problem, the ArcGIS IrisBG mobile sync is not super user-friendly for staff who don't know the IrisBG codes, and this couldn't be changed in the actual sync. So this is kind of a two-parted solution. One, I made a separate accession item type for just our nursery accessions, which I'll get into detail on. And also I made a separate ArcGIS Pro project that only runs the nursery inventory. So this allows us to customize a limited list of statuses, locations, or labels that can be used exclusively with nursery items. And I can also use Field Maps Designer in that nursery project to make those codes even clearer. The nursery item type. So under definitions, you'll find accession item codes, accession item status, and accession item type. So under accession item type, usually you'll have planting and maybe herbarium. We don't have an herbarium on site. We actually don't use that code. Left it in there. Maybe one day we will. But you can see I added a third code here called nursery. I gave it its own little code and I'm designated as living and its own very obvious color so that you can see in the system when you're working with a nursery item type. So under accession item statuses, also in definition, you can also customize the code list associated with that item type. So you can see here I've expanded nursery and our list of codes is actually the same ones as we use for planting, but much fewer of them. So there are codes that we use for plantings that might be really confusing for people who don't understand, what the difference between removed and dead is, or other things like that. And so I really just shortened the list and picked only the ones that are going to be applicable to nursery items to be available with them. The other codes won't even show. And similarly, in your locations, you can also restrict them for use by certain accession item types. So you can see over here where it says item type that these are restricted to plantings. So if there is no designated item type, those ones that are blank, those are available for use with all item types, so planting, herbarium, and nursery, but other ones you can restrict. So our garden locations I have restricted to planting, meaning that it kind of avoids that problem where you have a plant that's marked as being in the field or that has coordinates associated with it but is in the field, or, just kind of confusing. And our nursery items have additional codes in our propagation areas that our regular items aren't allowed to be in. So the actual nursery itself is open for all accession item types, since we do have plants that come out of the garden up to the nursery, say they're, the cycad that got damaged and needs to spend some time recovering. That's able to go up to the nursery and not be a nursery item type, whereas other propagations like seeds that are nursery item types have other more specified codes. So the other part of solving this problem is making Field Maps Designer a more user-friendly experience. And instead of the recommendation to group the fields by type in the IrisBG tutorial, I actually group our fields, both and this, in our regular nursery or regular gardens inventory by necessity. And you can also write in the description a little key, so to speak, a little key to the codes, which can help make the form more accessible and less intimidating. So what that looks like in the field on the left, you can see that I have them grouped into required, optional, and in this case, additional propagation details. That's mostly for our nursery horticulturists to use for, let's say, seed that's being thinned or germinated or whatever the case may be, versus just required, which is sort of the bare bones minimum of what you need to update an accession item. So on the right, you can see when you expand that menu, there's sort of a key to some of the most used codes. You are restricted in description. I think it's 255 characters, but you can get a lot of info in there if you do it right and just sort of use the most obvious ones that people are going to be using, a little definition of what different item conditions mean, stuff like that. So the follow-up to this is that only the plant records staff are actually running the sync and interacting with IrisBG itself. And we always do data review. We never import without review. We always check for accuracy before we save those changes in data import. But then the other piece to this is that within IrisBG, we can run reports on nursery items specifically. So you can see item type equals nursery here and at a certain time frame or by a certain person, which can allow us to see if there's any other follow-up that we need to be doing. We're not currently using this system for this, but the idea is that in the future, nursery staff and volunteers will also be able to use this to request labels. So we can check for any nursery item with label not okay within a certain time frame and be able to make a list of labels. So the third problem is the need for new, clear labels with proper nomenclature that easily shows which section different plants belong to. So we did purchase a thermal tag printer and software, and also 5 colors of printable nursery pot sticks. So our tags are printed based on the export from IrisBG, which means accession and taxon information is correct. We have our tag set printer set up so that you can't just go in there and print tags willy-nilly. It's printed exactly off of the export, so the accession name or the taxon name will always be what is in Iris. And we have, as I mentioned, 5 different colors of printable nursery stakes. So we colored these according to our pre-existing color coding system for labeling our tools. We spray paint tools depending on which garden area they belong to and which shed, and we just use those same colors for our labels, which allows us to designate when an order comes in, which label color it's getting, and which section it's going to be going to. This is the thermal printer that we ordered. We ordered from Specialty Tag and Label. They were really excellent at helping us figure out exactly what we needed. I sort of told them all of my harebrained dreams, and they found me the right printer, and we've been very happy with it. And it wasn't all that pricey as compared to some of the other printer, embosser, engraver kinds of things that we have in our office. So if you're not familiar with thermal printers, it basically bonds the ink, so to speak, directly to the label. So it's rated for horticultural use. It's supposed to be able to withstand UV and water and all of the things you have to deal with at a nursery for up to 3 years, which in theory, our nursery accessions shouldn't be up there longer than that. They should have gotten their accession tag and be out in the field by then. So for us so far, we've had them for 2 years and they're holding up great. So in IrisBG, back in IrisBG, you can customize your label types. So under definitions, there is label templates, just like custom report templates. And you can see here I have our nursery item type expanded. They're grouped by accession item type. And some of our nursery items labels are available here. So you can then use labels under reports to export these. And we have them set up as Excel files that we can use with our Nice Label software. So in Nice Label, there's a database wizard that lets you use an exported Excel file as the sort of database that it's working off of. So this lets us designate specific columns in the Excel file that populate specific text boxes on the labels. So you really just have to design the label once. You can see here that there's a couple different text boxes. There's a little box above them what's indicating that they're drawing from the database. And all of the labels then will look the same, and Nice Label will populate those fields for you. We can also use this to generate barcodes or QR codes, which was one of my necessities that I asked Specialty Tag and Label to help me find, which lets us generate a QR code for the accession number. You can actually scan QR codes directly in Field Maps. So if you're in Field Maps and you hit the search bar, there's a little button for scanning, and you can use that to scan a QR or a barcode. This will pull up exactly that accession record, which can also minimize mistakes if people are entering accession numbers by hand. They might pull up the wrong record, etc. So this is just one more step to sort of a user-friendly inventory process. We actually customize our label reports for specific collections needs. So the one we were just looking at was sort of our basic display label, but we also have a couple of templates saved for when more information is needed on a nursery label. So I guess last year we did a large collection of lilacs from off-site at another garden. Most of them were suckers, and we needed to differentiate these from our own internal cuttings, etc. So this is a custom label report that I wrote for the lilacs, coupled with a saved file that has those text boxes arranged how I want them to be in a nice label. And you can see there's some info missing from this, but on the spreadsheet, if for instance this had been a cutting, it would show material type as cutting, and under parentage it would show the accession number and name of the parent plant that cutting was taken. So it's really customizable, and you can put, within the confines of your label size, a lot of information that might be applicable to specific collections in your label. So these are the labels that we use. It is this PX material, which is a pretty flexible plastic that I find really useful. Our previous plastic was kind of too brittle, and you can get it in many different sizes. Ours are just all the same. But as I mentioned, they're printed with a pre-existing color scheme. So blue labels like this one are display labels. Our display plants, yellow, are designated for the camellia section, pink for the rose section, purple for our California native section, and white is sort of nursery or the catch-all for others. So the follow-up to this is, of course, that because these QR code tags are sort of integral to the nursery inventory process, it's an ongoing conversation to make sure that Plant Records is getting the labels up to the nursery that the nursery needs to keep the system and information flowing smoothly. And if or when, as we all can relate, nursery plants do end up out in the gardens before they've received their official accession tags. If impatient horticulturists see them come in off the truck and take them out immediately, the colored tags that we've given them are planted with them, which lets Plant Records have the opportunity to find, map, and tag them with their accession tags appropriately. This actually saved us already once this past year. The first sort of round of these labels was used when we took plants out of our seasonal promenade display, and some of those overwintered at the nursery, and I found them planted in a section that should have been all new plants. So while we were mapping the new plants, we saw a couple of the blue display tags from last year, and were able to scan those accession numbers and update those records and just go and print the tags for them immediately. So some of the next steps involved in this process for us, you'll notice that one of the desired outcomes hasn't been hit yet, which is we've not yet built our live inventory. The dream has always been to use an ArcGIS dashboard for this, and it's a little difficult with the need to clear the hosted feature layer. The current toolbox makes it feel kind of possible, so we're working on this right now. But if you have any tips or ideas about this, I'm all ears. I do have, as I mentioned, Lily, our plant records coordinator in the department now, and she has more ArcGIS use behind her and under her belt, so she is hopefully going to be working on this in the near future. This is sort of more of a current problem than a next step, but although the system works really well for purchased plant material, as soon as we get an invoice, we can go ahead and make those tags and they're ready to go in the plants. And same for propagations. There's still a significant backlog in the nursery, which can make it challenging. So we sort of originally had planned to do a wholesale sweep of the nursery, make all of those tags, make it all nice and pretty right away, but we have been able to accession new plants as they come in and really to work through smaller sections of the nursery at a time to get everything in the backlog into the system. And my ideal dream would be able to build a form in Survey 123 that allows Hort staff to scan and sort of check out plants, which would let us in Plant Records know immediately when and where things have been planted. So what this would look like would be a QR code at the nursery that staff could use their phone to scan, and then would go and scan all of the labels of the plants that they're taking out into the garden, update where they're going, what day it is, who's taking them, etc. The barrier to this is, as far as I have played around with, Survey 123 won't let you do multiple scans per form entry, so it would have to be each accession item as its own form entry, which I think is a barrier in our horticulturist staff probably wouldn't do. So I'm still working on that. And if you have good experience with coding in Survey 123, let me know, because I think it could work really well for us. So I do just want to throw out a special thank you to Lily Steinbrook, who is my new plant records coordinator. She is off today for Veterans Day, but really has been huge help in getting this project actually to fruition. And just to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or maybe you have the solutions to some of my problems, feel free to reach out to me at Ayers@Descanso.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Autumn. It's great to see in depth your workflow and the challenges that you've taken on.